Good day, my friends, wherever you may be in the world today. Alan Clements here from Maui, the occupied islands of Hawaii by the United States of America. Today, September 8th, 2021, a continuation of my thoughts from yesterday. The gift that Burma is. The guts that they have to play high stakes. Very important point for me. The guts, the ethical courage, the depth of soul and spiritual conviction to play such high stakes. What a gift that is to feel that. The gift that Burma is, and the guts, the bravery, the ethical, spiritual courage to play such high stakes as to challenge and to confront evil at such an unremitting level of violence that we see in Burma today and through decades. And in some way, a warning to the world, an ongoing warning that many of us know and feel in our soul, a warning to the world, a wake-up call to all of us that the march of totalitarianism is at our doorsteps. I don't think it's alarmist to say that anymore. I think it's pretty obvious and maybe an understatement in looking at the machinations of dictatorship, the nuclear-armed CCP in China, led by the sociopath Premier Xi Jinping, the unthinkable conglomerate known as the satanic cult in Afghanistan, the super evil jihadist, the Taliban, the rapists, the murderers, the ideologues. There's a march of evil. It's been here for a long time. However, it's on our watch and on our doorstep. And the gift of Burma in the midst of it. Burma has been undergoing a revolution to challenge dictatorship, fascism, authoritarianism, the psychology of totalitarianism that's embedded among many women and men worldwide, but also, of course, here in Myanmar, in Burma. And the horror of that, yes, the horror of that. My friend Aung San Suu Kyi, the friend of freedom, not my friend alone, the friend of freedom, the voice of revolution, the voice of feminine-inspired, dignified dissent to totalitarianism. How many of us remember the famous poem quote by the late Lutheran priest Niemann Mueller, a Hitler sympathizer, colluded with the Reich until he was taken away to the death camp and survived and wrote, you can never say it enough, first they came and got the communists, and because I was a Lutheran priest, I didn't speak up, and it goes on down the line. Until eventually there was no one left to speak up, and Mr. Mueller was subsequently taken to the death camp. 20 million others killed, persecuted, assassinated, raped, poisoned. I was just reading the other day a very obscure fact that I wish I knew more about, and I will research it, how within one particular ghetto or subsequent ghettos, call them urban death camps by the Nazis, the Warsaw Ghetto being perhaps one of the most well-known. Resistance. And how girls and mothers and fathers and sons and brothers and uncles managed to escape these urban prison death camps and fled to forests in German-occupied Europe at the time. And there they, I don't know how you survive temperatures 30 below zero without food, without water, without hygiene, without a pillow, a blanket, digging deep holes in the frozen earth and going from place to place. 20,000 resistance fighters that made themselves, as I was reading in this particular article, a nuisance to the machinery of fascism and dictatorship and totalitarianism. I can't even imagine for a heartbeat that there I am with my daughter, 14 years old, and other friends, and now we are resistance fighters in frigid temperatures without food and water and shelter and blanket, being persecuted, and thousands of our fellow resistance fighters are being slaughtered, raped, killed, and the blood is right there in the snow, frozen into the ice. Just a few short years ago. First, they came and got the communists, and because I was a former Buddhist monk, I didn't speak up. So many ways to annoy our righteousness, our separation, our belligerence, and isolate the country of Burma as their own problem, rather than this deep ecosystem of heart, a global felt ecology of conscience and universality of rights, earth rights, animal rights, human rights, global rights, cosmological rights, this deep regard for the sanctity of life being violated in precious Myanmar with Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. Virtually unknown to the world community, an Orwellian military evil tribunal with absolutely fictitious crimes attributed to her and her colleagues in an undisclosed location. What? How does an elected state councilor, the most prominent human being in a country of 54 million people, celebrated as Ma Su, the mother of democracy and freedom of the country, a celebrated Nobel Peace Laureate, a woman who I know very well, a student of our same teacher, dedicated to nonviolent principles, embodying the most radical expressions of politics, where reconciliation with evil empires is the priority, the Dhamma of reconciliation, a mantra of hers. And today, silence. Burma. A declaration of war by the National Unity Party, the association of all ethnicities that have been fighting this totalitarian military epic terrorist group run by Ming Online, this monster, this deviant of decency. And now the whole population has been encouraged to revolt. they were left no choice other than to submit and to suffocate in the tyranny of evil. Just like the Nazi Jewish resistance fighters that escaped and decided, no way will we just freeze to death in the forest. We'll do everything to take up the necessity to resist and to do what we can to preserve the sanctity of our own dignity and our conscience and our brothers and sisters in the gulags within the cities, in ghettos and in those death camps. The smell of death, the smell of Zyklon, the smell of death, the smell of Zyklon. And Niemann Mueller talks about then they came and got the meditators who had been to Burma, but they were Americans and Europeans and Australians, and they were able to go back, but because they were non-Burmese, they really didn't need to speak up for their brethren, their sisters, their uncles, their loyalty to the tradition of transformational mindfulness and meditation, Dhamma, and wisdom. There was a separation. There was something there where there was a breach of moral loyalty. Pause. I'm not trying to preach from some place of hierarchy. If I am, it's my mistake. But more to the issue is, how can I and you collectively invoke an ayahuasca-like, a DMT, a psychedelic convulsion of apathy and normalization of violence, and that United Nations Security Council that is doing nothing other than playing the politics of money and profit and control and leaving this breathtaking nation of Dhamma and of revolution and of dissent and of nonviolent, feminine, inspired revolution in all of these brothers and sisters. You know, where are you? Where are your guts? How we sit in the sanctity of our comfort zones and allow this atrocity to go on. I think about the various ways in which I've been associated with Burma and the people there, the teachers there. You know, one of the things that Sayadaw U Pandita, Da Aung San Suu Kyi's spiritual advisor, my meditation teacher, who passed away in 1996 at 95 years old, and pretty much the philosophical architect of Burma's revolution of the spirit, especially the nonviolent expression, and equally the architect of what he coined as a phrase, the Dhamma of reconciliation, which is really the fine art of non-demonizing and doing all that one can through nonviolent means to overcome prejudice and bias and to heal so that friend and enemy become bonded to the greater good, the future of freedom, rather than empowering their differences. Very beautiful concept. But the constant dialogue I remember having with him and hearing him have with others was, how do we invoke a revolutionary experience in the mind of someone who's teetering between comfort, privilege, profit, conscience, dignity, and compassionate activism? How do you ignite a fire there? How do you nurture it? How do you moisten it? How do you get someone to consciously reflect on their own inadequacies, their own shortcomings, their own inabilities to rise to the occasion of moral bravery, to the point, if it was their own wife or husband and their mother, their brother, their own body and mind that was at stake, only then would they rise up, or would they cower to their knees and say, listen, whatever you want, count me in. I'll belong to your cult and collude with you so long as you save my privilege, my profit, my freedom, my safety. I'll even turn in my wife, my husband, my friend, my Buddha, my Allah, whatever is needed to compromise my soul, sign me right up. That level of cowardice. In Burma today, they play such high stakes because they have some kind of deep root, ethical, spiritual, Dhammic root, if you will, in I don't know how else to say it, but in values, in principles, in the etiquette of the holy. They are tapped in large majority. You know, the most critical thing I've ever heard Aung San Suu Kyi ever say, and I was triggered by this morning because I was reading a tweet by I think she's an Italian, I'm not sure, but Rose McGowan, the woman who was raped by the rapist Harvey Weinstein, I think it was in 1997, and she decided to tell the truth than to cower into the swamp of Hollywood and complicity with rape being acceptable in order to have a part as a woman. And she spoke out. And she was saying, I had to begin to differentiate myself from being around stupid people. And I thought there was something very elegant about just calling these monstrous women and men, but primarily men, just stupid. And I've heard Aung San Suu Kyi refer to those so-called demon evil men who kill and rape and assassinate. How stupid. And it's a very common joke label for the inadequacies of other in Burma. And those of you who know, who've ever been with Dharma teachers in Burma, they're very blunt about not coddling your ego, you know, for the sake of the transformation of your own wisdom and your own freedom, your own compassion, your own courage. Burma is a country. If we could study the science, the Dhamma science of grace under pressure, courage, as Aung San Suu Kyi said, renewed repeatedly under harsh, unremitting pressure. To take the poetry out of those phrases and to study the Dhamma science of how to actualize, if you will, the emotionality to live and to breathe in the solidarity of those resistance fighters who fled to the forest in occupied Germany, in occupied Europe, and decided not to let their blood alone go into the snow, into the ice. They took up arms. Burma has declared active defensive war on the evil empire of Meng Online and his state administration council, known as MASAC, Burma's Pol Pot and their Khmer Rouge. And I'm sitting here today, it's like, oh my God, you know? How many people I'm listening to and talking to and receiving information from and dialogue with that are using now on a very frequent basis the doubling down, even the tripling down of authoritarianism. It wasn't in the vocabulary even a month or two ago. And beginning to understand the machinations of totalitarianism and dictatorship, and what does fascism really mean? And what does it mean to slowly feel, quickly sense that your civil liberties, your freedom, your capacity to use your own thoughts in the safety and the sanctity of a democratic society are being eroded. Freedoms are being eroded. The understanding of freedom is being assaulted. Misinformation is the new sonic hymn coming out of the media networks and the governments and even the United Nations. We're hearing distortion as music. We're hearing misinformation as the sound of freedom. We're missing the point of the late Niemann Mueller talking. And then they came and got the American elite politicians And because I was a Lutheran priest, and I didn't particularly like the way in which they governed, their corruption, their privilege, their inability to respond to the needs of others, because they threw Burma under the bus, it's like I took an arrogant position and said, you know, it's time that they be disposed, and I didn't say a damn word. In fact, I even signed a kind of a slip that said, you know, good to get rid of them. I mean, the violence of omission in Burma. The world has violently omitted conscious intervention to support the birth of freedom and democracy, civility and decency, and empowered the sale and the use of weapons primarily through the Ukraine, Turkey, underground armed dealers, and up front with Putin in Russia, and up front with the sociopath Xi Jinping in China. That Belt and Road thing that's going down throughout the world and in Burma, from that oil pipeline from the Bay of Bengal, pumping like a big aorta, a big heart from the Bay of Bengal, oil and gas into Yunnan, into China. 1,200 kilometers, is it, of pumping oil and gas through the Rakhine state, being distracted not to ridicule the plight of the Rohingya and the people of the Rakhine state and all throughout the country of Burma. It's terrible. But it was a manipulation to take attention off of Xi Jinping and the Belt and Road Initiative and the collusion with the satanic cult in Burma known as Masak, and the millions and millions of US dollars being pumped into their egoic consciousness to buy what? More and more jewels and rubies and land in various places around the world so they can flee when they need to. Very much like what the Third Reich did. Why are we allowing this? And in Burma, the gift that Burma is, the guts to play such high stakes. And U Pandita would so encourage people, you must learn the fine Dharma, spiritual art of self-evaluation, radical, courageous self-evaluation. Look at your own mindscape, right? We have to do this every day of our life as we wash and bathe and drink and anoint and sleep and dream and nap, do our yoga and meditate, the active self-assessment of the qualities of our own conscience and how conscious are we of our ethics, our morality, our dedication to loyalty. Loyalty. That's one of the just so breathtaking when I think about the people of Burma, my friends and colleagues and mentors and teachers. So many people. The loyalty to values. Yes, there's corruption. Dictatorship and totalitarianism, as we know, works based upon corruption. The threat of violence and torture and the manipulation of conscience through privilege and wealth and luxury and opportunity. Buy them, buy them, buy them, buy them, buy them, sell them out, sell their souls out. And then they came and got the Jews. I was Lutheran, man. Then they came and got the Muslims. And hey, listen, I'm no offense, I'm not Islamophobic, but they do have that extremist side to them, you know, and you never know who's going to become extreme, right? And so we justify non-loyalty to the dignity of conscience, and we throw them under the bus. Burma's been thrown under the bus, but the people of Burma are not under the bus. They are demonstrating for themselves what I gather through video and audio and text and communication with people around the world and in the country. They are rising up. What a gift. What a gift. They are the ones that were forgotten during the World War II. They were the ones that went to the forest and took up weapons against all costs. I'm aware that I'm only repeating things that I've read. I have no idea except that I can feel them in my body. I can feel a little bit of it. I want to feel more. I want to feel like I want to get closer and closer to that quality of conscience and dignity and ethical bravery to rise up sufficiently enough to, hey, listen, I'm not going to collude with the Third Reich. I'm going to resist them because it's right. It's a warning to the world. Burma's a gift to the world. Hey guys, what you fear happening on your own shores, that's happening to us, it's coming your way. And if you don't think so, just remember the poetic, prophetic phrase, quote, poem, hymn, scream by the late Lutheran priest, 5 years in Auschwitz, was it? Who was a sympathizer with the Third Reich and supremacy and colluded with Hitler until they came and got him, and there was no one left to speak up. The world is infinitely small, to state something so obvious, and the only distance is our numbness, is our separation, is our inability to hold the solidarity of souls in the hands of love and freedom, universality of a right, all beings born in dignity and in conscience, irregardless of ethnicity, language, economic status, or gender or religion. Where is our Dhamma of interrelated respect and radical compassion brought forth with creative activism to the point that our leaders, what would I give to give a weekend with the leaders in our Senate and Congress and Oval Office in the United Nations, rent a big hall and bring in all the most radical women, shamans around the world, and close the doors and bring in nutrients and food and drink and music and the great hymn of respect, and give these people heroic doses of transformational molecules that melt down inadequacies, fusions with collusions that by function denigrate self and other. Put in their mind's view Burma as their own husband or wife, something with artificial intelligence and the cinematic poetry of projected visions, and put those goggles on so that what those presidents and prime ministers and ambassadors and congressmen and senators see in their own mindscape, oh my God, then they came and got my wife, and because I thought that it wasn't my wife, I didn't speak up, and they begin to teeter on that edge of inaction with moral bravery. What does it take? What does it take for the whole world to pause for 12 minutes and to reflect upon the qualities of revolutionary dignity, compassion, and conscience and action in Myanmar, the gift that the country's provided, to reflect and breathe in, inhale the DMT of Burma's revolution of the spirit. Why is that so radical? Why? Then they came and got the people on Maui. And because I was a yoga teacher, and because I was a sitter for psychedelics, and because I had a beautiful home in Lower Kula and one in Olinda and another one way over there in Kihei and another one on planet Mars and another one in the soil of denial, I never thought of myself as a freedom fighter. I never even dreamt that there could be resistance where I would have to go to the forest of my fear and resist the totalitarian march of Xi Jinping and his running dogs around the world with Klaus Schwab in Davos and all of the oligarchs in Silicon and Wall Street, and connect the dots. And guess what? Then they're going to come and get me. And because there was no one left to speak up for that one last little definition called you, however you describe yourself, there was no one left there to care for you. And is that the kind of self-fulfilling betrayal of decency that we feel in our own soul? Isn't that the betrayal of God? Isn't that the rise of totalitarianism, the absolute absence of the spirit? The war is on right now. That's why it's a spiritual battle. And everyone is either a soldier who will resist or a soldier who will throw down and become a running dog in collusion with the totalitarian oligarchs. I think it's becoming very, very clear. I could go on. I'll say a few closing words. Oh, my Lord. It's such an imperfect world to state something so painfully obvious. You and me, flawed by birth, flawed by practice, flawed by word, flawed, but at the same time, those little lights that get in, those cracks, that allow just bringing to light that which has been dark. And you go, wow, it's never too late for redemption. It's never too late to care and to have the courage to act on behalf of the greater good. If I had a magic wand and a wish, and I had the ear of our presidents and prime ministers and the Secretary General, the United Nations Security Council, you know, what would I say? If I had 90 minutes tied to the world digitally, and people were forced to okay, put down their fork and turn off Netflix and just pause from their moment of love or sex or masturbation or child feeding, or they did that simultaneously to my, okay, let's reduce it to 30 minutes. Let's even give it a global TED Talk of 20. What would I say? If it were my final words alive. If I were looking through the scope of a rifle in that forest somewhere in Europe during the time of Hitler, who would be in that scope? And if that rifle shot the bullet of conscience, the awakening of conscience, whose head would I point it at? My own? God? Satan? Ming Online? Biden? The EU? Who? The globe? All 7.8 billion of us? The unborn? The future of life? Is it possible to say something, to create something, to fantasize about something, to imagine something that could obliterate the collective ignorance of the whole in such a way? Is this just a dream? Is this just craziness being made manifest in this moment? Is it just the frustration of an individual who doesn't see his own inability to achieve his own enlightenment, his own nibbana, his own arhantship, his own Buddhahood, his own divine feminine, his own non-dual transcendent awakening that renders all of these dualities null and void in the great sea of unity? Are there words that can describe inadequacy sufficiently enough to satisfy coexisting with evil? Or do we keep playing at the edge of that radical expression of 20,000 Jews in deplorables who left and fled against all costs into the forests to fight until death? How dramatic is that, Alan? What are you getting to here in yourself that you can't get to through meditation? I'm speaking about the people in Burma. I'm an outsider. My courage is acceptable. It's not radical. The radical courage in Burma among the freedom fighters and those who've been held as prisoners of conscience at this very moment, they represent a light of resistance both to dictatorship and to totalitarianism in the past, in the present, and on the future of this planet and this cosmos. They are epic existential rebels, resistance fighters to the darkness of the totalitarianism that we have embedded on this planet. That's rad. And I want to honor as best as I can in a very short story, a short story that I wrote a little bit back. And I'd like to read it to close today in honor of the women and the men, the thousands detained in prison camps and labor camps, both in Myanmar and around the world, prisoners of conscience, radical women and men who are willing to be tortured and die because of their conscience, their ethical power. There's something so splendid about that, something so beautiful about that level of loyalty to principles and values. Thank you, Burma. Thank you, boys and girls who have died. Thank you for those of you who are being raped and tortured right now. Thank you, thank you, thank you for the light that you are. You are not forgotten. The light that you are can be seen for those who see. And those who don't, they will see perhaps at some point if enough of us talk up about what it is that we see and make actions that coordinate with that contact. Not sufficient just to see, but to feel and to act. January 4th, 1996, I was invited to Aung San Suu Kyi's home, 54 University Avenue, Rangoon, Burma. Independence Day from England, 135 years of white supremacist oppression. At that time, Aung San Suu Kyi and most of her colleagues had been released from prison during their first incarceration. Here it is, 26 years later, and she's still in prison. And 400 of Burma's leading activists, many of them who had been imprisoned, many of them who were imprisoned, were tortured and raped, and their family and their friends came to her compound, her home on the lake in Rangoon, and they built a stage, a makeshift stage, and they did something very spectacular. They have a long tradition in Burma of the Burning Man. They call it the Anyet. It's a all day, all night festival of the arts, of culture, of dance, of music, of theater, of literature, of poetry, of mockery, of satire, of comedy. It's brilliant. And I've been to many, but never on Independence Day under a totalitarian evil regime where these 400 activists had recently been released from prison, many of them, yet were still living in a totalitarian country ruled at that time by a former dictator, Ne Win and Tan Shui, and today we have Tan Shui's appointee, Ming Online, a succession of these evil despots. And they decided to non-violently create songs and poems and movements through dance to illuminate freedom, as I was told. Independence Day. Let's live and create the poetry and the music and the behavior of people who are living freely despite the threats of persecution and violence by the totalitarian dictators. What does it mean to live freely today, despite the onslaught of restrictions and mandates? What does it mean not to give up our freedom, but to not only not give it up, but to celebrate it at the same time, to do what the late Lutheran priest did, which is to speak up for the others, not just to celebrate our own freedom. And so they were speaking up for the people of their country and, quite frankly, as I understood it, for the freedom of the world. They lit a torch of freedom. A very short 3-minute little reading of my experience that day, January 4th, 1996 in Rangoon. And I read it because if I were to die, I would like this to be something I spoke up about, to fulfill my vision of learning from Niemann Mueller's epic injunction to all of us to speak up. I hope you'll stay with me here. I'm at Aung San Suu Kyi's home in Rangoon, a place I've come to know through months of secretive conversations with her and other revolutionaries in their struggle for freedom. I hear the sounds of jubilation in the festive air. As a Westerner dressed in Burmese attire, I'm unrecognizable as I mingle among several hundred of the country's most prominent democracy activists. They're celebrating Independence Day in defiance of dictatorship, with gatherings of 5 or more a crime against the state and punishable by imprisonment, torture, even death by starvation or rape. The revolutionary atmosphere was alive with traditional theater, music, singing, storytelling, puppetry, and classical dance, and radiant with the people's love of harmlessness as the most effective means to fight totalitarian tyranny. On the lakeside of Aung San Suu Kyi's compound, the curtain opened on the makeshift stage, and to the joy of all gathered, Parley, the country's preeminent spoken word satirist, appeared. Many say that the seeds of George Orwell's totalitarian classic, 1984, was birthed during his years in Burma as a policeman. And my translator explained, Parley's performances brought new meaning to Orwell's Big Brother. So much so that telling the truth was not only a revolutionary act, but one met with prison, torture, and often death in this country. As Parley took the mic, I was told that he had just been released the day before from a hard labor camp in the north. His crime? Satirizing Burma's military dictator at his last gig. And this was Parley's first act upon release, traveling underground from Mandalay to perform here in Rangoon on Independence Day, the very day 50 years before that Burma unchained herself from 135 years of British imperialism. Parley continued, "For 6 years I've been pounding rocks 20 hours a day with leg and arm irons on, waiting for this moment to perform again." Parley continues, "Let me offer a few reminders from our brother George Orwell. Although he lived with us back in the 40s, his spirit lives on today. He said, 'A people that would allow themselves to be dominated by corrupt generals, politicians, imposters, thieves, and traitors, as they do not only here in Burma, but all over the world, especially in China, Russia, and North Korea, and in other places as well, are not victims, but accomplices. Although counterintuitive," Parley continued, "the greater the understanding of the beast, the greater the delusion. The more intelligent the true human, the less sane. Therefore, feel that staying human is essential, even when it feels like it can't have any result, and in so doing, you've beaten them. And if liberty means anything, it means the right to tell imposters what they do not want to hear, especially if they refer to themselves as a military general, a president, a prime minister, or a politician." How amazing. With that said, I know that today's show, Parley continued, will land me back in prison. But so be it. And he concludes by saying, freedom is more important than fear. How rad is that? Thank you, Burma. Thank you, U Parley. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, you're not alone, despite the fact of being in an undisclosed location, undergoing an Orwellian trial for lies. You are being heard and felt, and we around the world are resisting totalitarianism on our televisions and our flat screens and our Oval Offices, on Wall Street, in our stock portfolios. We're divesting of all collusions with the rise of the Fourth Reich. Okay, we're all going to listen to the Reverend Neiman Mueller. Then they came and got the colluders. And because I was a colluder with the rise of the Reich, I hesitated that I don't feel quite courageous, but I'm going to rise to the occasion. I'm going to not drink the Kool-Aid. I'm going to drink the ayahuasca. I'm going to smoke the DMT. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to listen to this video. I'm going to read books by Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. I'm going to rise in my ethical courage and sever my collusion, and I'm going to go to the forest and fight the Reichians. I'm going to resist, okay? Well, I conclude here with what Parley does. For the next 2 hours, Parley and his mustache brothers, as they're called, dazzled the audience with biting satire aimed squarely at the evil of the military dictatorship in his own country. Remember, this is 25 years ago. And the totalitarian meme embedded in the mind of most every democratically elected freedom-loving leader worldwide. People laughed and cried and got up and danced in a revolutionary expression of moral rebellion, a virtue I drew from here in the house of Rocky. And not sure enough, the day after his show, Parley, this is true, the day after his show, or perhaps 2 days after the show at Daw Aung San Suu Kyi's home, January 4th, 1996, he was picked up in the middle of the night by the totalitarian military police in Burma. It could have been the SS under the Third Reich. It could be anywhere in the world by the running dogs of totalitarianism. We don't know anymore. It's on our doorsteps. And he was carted off without trial and sentenced to 6 more years in a hard labor camp, pounding rocks with arm and leg irons 20 hours a day. I saw him after he was released that second time in Mandalay in his home, where he was confined and told he could never leave his home again to perform. And he and his brother at that time continued to perform defiant acts of revolt and revolution to the dictatorship from their living room. His shows and my interviews with him are in our books, Burma's Voices of Freedom. Read them. I'll close. I'm proud to say that I was interviewed by a group of radical Burmese young activists from Los Angeles recently in a no-holds-barred hour-and-a-half videoed interview with these young people that's going to be released in the next several days. It is my Uparley moment, regardless of the outcome, no matter who is upset by it. I could not in good conscience do anything other than to speak up. And I hope it is seen by you and forwarded. We will make it clear when it goes up. But it's meant for Ming Online in Burma, and it's meant for Joseph Biden in Washington, and it's meant for the United Nations Security Council in New York and around the world. It's meant for the leaders of the world. It's a direct assault on their conscience, in my humble way. We also are releasing, with my longtime colleague and friend, Jeffrey Hellman, the audiobook from my book with Daw Aung San Suu Kyi called The Voice of Hope from 1995 and 1996. After 25 years, finally recorded it. Unfortunately, she's imprisoned, so her voice could not be heard, but I have voiced my questions and I've voiced her responses to the best of my ability. This will be released soon as Audible and Amazon approves of the files, which they're now reviewing. We will release that and make a statement about that. And with my colleague Fergus Harlow, our books, Burma's Voices of Freedom, I wish there was a philanthropist out there of a few $1,000s who would get these 4-volume sets and send them to every dignitary, every leader, every prime minister, every member of the United Nations worldwide. Translate them into their respective languages and gift the world the voices of these political prisoners, including Uparley, including an entire volume of conversations with Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and at least 50 other political prisoners who had been released and or dead at this point. Some of them back in prison, including Aung San Suu Kyi. Radical bravery under pressure. These are lessons for the future of freedom and to confront totalitarianism today. So from my heart to yours, thank you for tuning in. And I hope you have a beautiful day. And I hope there's something valuable in this sharing that excites in you your own revolution of conscience and participates in the challenge to totalitarianism as it comes knocking on our own door. So from my heart to yours, thank you for tuning in. Have a beautiful day. Thank you.